Today we are looking at a case from the start of the 20th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. Eli Feasel lived on a farm just outside the small village of Bostwick in Nebraska, which is about 15 miles from the city of Red Cloud. Bostwick is in the south-central part of the state, in Nuckolls County, near the Kansas border, and is surrounded by open farmland. Eli did not own the land he worked. He leased his farm and made his living from it. By 1903, his household included his housekeeper, 35-year-old Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson, and her son, 19-year-old Charles Hutchinson. Charles did much of the work on the farm, an arrangement that was common in rural communities at the time, where work and daily life were closely tied. They were often visited by a man named Eli Feasel, who was 30 years old, and Eli's nephew. Some believed that Harley only visited his uncle, as he had an interest in Mrs. Hutchinson, and it was claimed that Eli too was very keen on his housekeeper, and strongly objected to the attention she was receiving from others. It was said that this caused tension within the household, especially with Mrs. Hutchinson's son Charles. Eli had cattle and hogs, as well as 70 acres of corn. He had done well over the years, and had cleared all his debts, so although the land was leased, his stock and machinery were all owned by himself. Across much of the United States at the start of the 20th century, agriculture remained central to the economy, and many people depended directly on the land for their income. In states like Nebraska, farming was very important, with success depending as much on the weather as on efforts. For those who leased their land, as Eli did, there was the added pressure to make each season pay, as rent and living costs had to be met from whatever the farm produced. On the 1st of November 1903, Eli and Charles went to the nearby town of Superior, a short distance from the farm, and one of the closest commercial centers to the area. In a rural district such as Nuckolls County, towns like Superior are often visited for trade, supplies, and meeting others from surrounding farms. The main purpose of their visits was to sell corn, but while there, Eli was seen drinking alcohol, and when he left town with Charles, it was reported that he was heavily intoxicated. However, he was never seen again. At first, no one really realized he was missing. Christmas passed, and still nothing was heard of him. When people inquired about his whereabouts, Mrs. Hutchinson would say that Eli had gone to visit his mother and brother in Humboldt, a small city about 70 miles from Bostwick. At first, this was accepted, but by February 1904, doubts began to spread. Mr. John Day, a resident of Superior, who had known Eli for some time, received a letter from his relatives asking if he knew anything of Eli, as they had not heard from him for some time. He realized that Eli was not in Humboldt, as Mrs. Hutchinson had claimed, and he then contacted Eli's brother, Mr. Thomas Feasel. Thomas visited the farm to try and establish what had become of Eli, and when he arrived he was surprised to find that Charles Hutchinson and Eli Feasel had been selling Eli's hogs and corn and keeping the proceeds for themselves. He questioned them about Eli's whereabouts, but their answers were vague and inconsistent. Knowing his brother well, Thomas Feasel did not believe that Eli would have left his farm and his responsibilities without explanation or arrangement, especially for such an extended period. Their behaviour on the farm only strengthened his suspicions that something serious had taken place. Convinced that Eli had met with foul play, he concluded that the two young men were responsible for his disappearance. So firmly did he hold this belief that he placed the matter in the hands of an attorney in Superior, and formal steps were taken. Following this, Eli Feasel and Charles Hutchinson were arrested, and both men were held while inquiries were carried out into Eli's disappearance. Despite the search and the arrests, no trace of Eli Feasel was found, and no physical evidence emerged to confirm that a crime had taken place. With no body recovered, and no clear proof linking either suspect directly to the disappearance, the case could not be sustained. As a result, both men were released, and the proceedings were dismissed. Following this, both Nanny and Charles Hutchinson remained on the farm, and continued using Eli Feasel's property and livestock. However, there was now increased suspicion in the community, and most people believed that the mother and son knew far more about what happened to the elderly man than they were admitting. After some time, Mrs. Hutchinson and Charles left the farm. Mrs. Hutchinson found employment as a housekeeper at a property in the town of Nelson, and Charles began to work on a farm close to the town of Guide Rock. Local people, however, remained intrigued about what had happened to Eli Feasel, and some of his neighbours consulted a medium, who claimed that Eli's body could be found buried in the cellar on his farm. This information caused a great deal of discussion, and a search was made of the outbuildings. Soon a place was discovered that looked as though it might have been used to conceal a body. Inside there was a rusty wrench that was marked with stains that some believed could be blood. Following this, the medium was consulted again, and this time claimed that the body had been removed from the cellar and buried elsewhere. More detailed directions were given, pointing to a particular field, and acting on this, men dug in several places on the Feasel farm, but nothing was found. The farm that had been leased to Eli Feasel was now being worked by a man named Joseph Stanley, and in May 1904 he uncovered something disturbing beneath the soil. In what appeared to be a recently disturbed grave, he also found an overcoat, and inside was a human hand and hair from someone's head. In the coat pocket there was an empty whiskey bottle. He contacted the authorities, and investigators soon arrived to examine the scene. What caught their attention was horse and buggy tracks near the field, and one detail stood out in particular. The horse had a trailed shoe, which is a horseshoe, with a noticeable projection or worn mark at the front, and this had left a clear drag or scrape in the ground, making the tracks easier to recognise. Sheriff Hodges considered this significant, and concluded that if he could identify a horse with such a shoe, he might be able to trace who had been in the field. After a few days of searching, his inquiries led him to Johnson's livery stable in the city of Red Cloud, where horses could be hired by members of the public. It was here that he found a horse with the same shoe. It had been recorded that on the evening of the 5th of May, Charles Hutchinson had gone to Johnson's livery stable and ordered a rig, but later changed his mind, saying that he would take it the following day. Charles had returned on the evening of Friday the 6th of May, and this time hired a horse and buggy, stating that he needed it to go to the Stark Ranch at Amboy, a short distance from the town. The sheriff was told that on that day, as Charles was preparing to leave, a gentleman named Mr. Bayliss saw him and asked whether he was going to Guide Rock, to which Charles replied that he was. Mr. Bayliss had been summoned to Red Cloud as a juror and had considered going to Guide Rock that night and returning in time for court the next morning. However, he later decided not to risk it and remained in Red Cloud, after which Charles drove away alone. On the night he hired the rig, Charles also told Mr. Bayliss that he intended to spend the night on the Henry farm, a place that he knew well. Very early the next morning, Charles had returned the rig to the stable, paid the usual fee for the trip to Amboy, and had immediately left. The sheriff was told, however, that the horses appeared to be very tired, which suggested that they had travelled much further than Amboy, and when staff at the stable began to unhitch the buggy, they noticed a strong and unpleasant smell coming from it. The sheriff continued his inquiries and visited the Henry farm, but was told that Charles Hutchinson had not spent the night there. It was also noted that a spade had gone missing from the property. When the sheriff spoke to the people living near the farm previously leased by Eli Feasel, some said that they had seen Charles Hutchinson near the farm late at night on the 6th of May with a female companion. Footprints found around the grave were from both a male and a female shoe, and although not conclusive, they were said to be consistent with the shoe sizes of Charles and Mrs. Hutchinson. The sheriff believed that Eli had died on the 1st of November 1903, and concluded that after drinking in Superior, Eli may have made advances towards Mrs. Hutchinson, and that her son Charles had stepped in to defend her. From this, his theory developed that the mother and son had killed Eli and first concealed the body in the cellar or near one of the outbuildings before burying it in a field. It was his opinion that when Joseph Stanley later decided to plough the field, Charles became concerned, and fearing the remains might be uncovered, on the 6th of May he hired a horse and buggy and returned to the place where he had buried the body. Under the cover of darkness, he and his mother dug up and removed the remains. However, in haste, parts of the body, including a hand, were left behind. Many local people came to accept this theory, and in an effort to discover where the body might have been taken, a medium was consulted once again. The medium claimed that the remains had been thrown into a river, though no exact location could be given. As a result, streams in the surrounding area were searched, but nothing was found. Despite the fact that there was no body, Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson, her son Charles Hutchinson, Eli Feasel, and another man named Charlie Holmgren were all arrested in connection with the disappearance. The arrests were made on suspicion and circumstances rather than direct physical evidence. Charlie Holmgren was held briefly, but released the following day, when no evidence could be found linking him with the crime. The investigation now continued with the remaining suspects. Eventually it was decided that Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson, Charles Hutchinson, and Eli Feasel should all be charged with murder, and they were held for further proceedings. On Monday the 13th of June 1904, a preliminary hearing was held. The state was represented by County Attorney E.D. Brown, assisted by ex-District Judge G.W. Stubbs and his brother F.H. Stubbs. 20 witnesses were called for the prosecution, but the defence, led by ex-Congressman R.D. Sutherland, chose not to present evidence at this stage. Mr. Sutherland argued that no body had ever been found and that there was no definite proof that Eli Feasel was dead, and therefore no proper case could be made against the accused. The judge, however, disagreed, and he considered that the evidence was sufficient to justify sending Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson, her son Charles Hutchinson, and Eli Feasel forward for trial at the district court. News of the case had spread throughout Nebraska, and there was much discussion in towns and rural communities across the state. In places such as local stores, post offices and railway stations, people debated the details as they were reported, and the story attracted widespread attention. Public opinion was divided. Some believed that the chain of circumstances presented by the prosecution pointed strongly towards guilt and felt a conviction was likely. Others were more cautious, pointing to the lack of direct proof in the uncertainty that still surrounded Eli's disappearance. The trial began on Tuesday the 4th of October 1904. Each side called a large number of witnesses. The prosecution was conducted by County Attorney Brown, assisted by the Stubbs brothers, and the defence was again led by R.D. Sutherland, assisted by Oliver Wroughton. Early in the trial, it became clear that there was not enough evidence to implicate Eli Feasel, and he was therefore discharged by the prosecution and released to return to the place of his employment, where he had been working when arrested. The prosecution presented evidence that Charles Hutchinson had hired a livery rig on the 6th of May at Red Cloud and had returned it the following morning in a worn and damaged condition. It was also stated that the buggy and coverings were in an unfit state for use due to a strong and unpleasant smell coming from them. They then stated that a few days later, a grave was discovered on the Feasel farm containing a human hand and items of clothing, including a coat. They presented a witness who confirmed that he had sold an identical coat to Eli Feasel some years earlier. Further evidence was introduced, which appeared to link Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson, the mother of Charles Hutchinson, to the crime as an alleged accomplice. The closing arguments were described as powerful, in particular the address made by G.W. Stubbs for the prosecution, which left little doubt in the minds of many who listened. When all the evidence was given, and both the prosecution and the defence had given their closing arguments, the judge summed up the case before instructing the jury to retire. Around 4 hours later, they returned with a sealed verdict, and the judge adjourned proceedings for the day. The following morning, the courtroom was crowded, and there was a strong sense of expectation as the clerk read the jury's decision. The prisoners were found guilty of murder in the second degree. The silence in the room showed the importance of the verdict and the level of interest the case had drawn. Those who had followed the trial closely felt that the jury could hardly have reached a different conclusion. When the verdict was read, Charles Hutchinson showed no emotion, though later tears were seen on the face of his mother. The following morning, the prisoners were brought back to court, where the judge sentenced Charles Hutchinson to 12 years and Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson to 10 years, both to be served in a state penitentiary. Mrs. Nanny Hutchinson was released in the summer of 1911 and later found work washing dishes. In November 1911, her son Charles Hutchinson was also released. Both had spent approximately 7 years in prison. The case continued to fascinate the local people. Extensive searches of the farm, the surrounding fields, and nearby streams continued, but no trace of him was ever discovered. The absence of a body left doubts in the minds of some, and for many, it remained uncertain exactly what had happened to him. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.